Welcome to Finding the Frame. I'm your host, Xander Miller, and this is the show where we practice discernment through dialogue. We call this Finding the Frame because we're actually looking for truth. That's what we're discerning, and we're doing that through the process of dialogue, which is done in the spirit of love or caritas or charity. So we're trying to discover who we are, why we're here, what we're doing, overcome existential crisis and overcome also meaning crisis. Like why what we're doing is important by talking about it, by speaking about it, by wrestling with these ideas. And today I have um, an excellent partner to wrestle with these ideas, Zara. Zara, how are you doing? Why don't you take
Hey,
a
good to be here. Good to be here. Nice to see you. Are we always up this early? I think we both are.
yeah.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, I got into it from the Jocko Willink thing. So it's for me it's 5:30 in the morning. I think Zara it's 4:30-ish in the morning. But I think we're busy guys. We got days to do and
Oh, I'm up early, but I've never run 2 miles. I've never run 10 feet. I don't, so I can't invoke the name of any of those guys, but yeah, it's nice to be here.
I like to I think and for me it's when my mind is most fresh, so it's the best time to have these kind of conversations. If I can find someone who will do it with me, which
Yeah,
can be
yeah,
the challenge. So
yeah. There's kind of a trick to early morning things. I think I have a lot of friends who are much older, and they get to live twice as long because they do an entire day's worth of living before anybody else wakes up. And there's definitely something to that.
mhm, indeed. So I want to could you introduce us and tell us a little bit about yourself, Zara? And like
Yeah. So uh, there's not that much to tell, I guess. I'm interested in academics, and I've been coaching and tutoring students in academia for a long time. And I think we're here to discuss the state of the institutions and what it is that they're doing to the humanities and what they're discarding and what the best plan is for us to move forward.
mhm.
Um, and sort of to diagnose and see, okay, and prognose, like, okay, what's exactly going on here and what's the best way to move forward in that setting. So
Yeah.
happy to talk about that.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. But I like to like with finding the frame, it's that it can take us in different directions and we're connecting these things too, right? So I think when we're having a conversation, like the ideal thing is to get all the different layers in alignment and harmonized, right? So we're having this conversation, we're talking about what the particular of like we're doing this in the morning, we're doing it between two different people, but we're also talking about like what we're doing, but we're also talking about the ideas of why we're doing it behind it, right? So there's this whole hierarchy of things that we're trying to get in the alignment and do at the same time. So actually I wanted to ask you a little bit. So you're using Zara as your internet handle and
Yes.
you and it's short for Zarathustra. And I have a question about that. So I know that Zarathustra is I think it's a not a Persian prophet, but he's also used as the as sort of a character or as a persona um by Nietzsche. And I sort of was interested, like, are you more is are you more inspired by Nietzsche or are you more inspired by the original Persian prophet, or is there something about the dynamism of the two? Like like I
That's
think
fantastic.
yeah, I'm curious why Zarathustra?
Okay, so about 6 months or so, I decided to do an experiment on Twitter to see if it was possible to use technology to have the good conversation. Can you do academic? Because there's something very personal and maybe even intimate that requires proximity and getting to know types of people and personalities and characters. There's a reason to go to a college. It's not just that you get knowledge from books, but it's that you meet people who've dedicated their lives to they're professors. They profess to care about whatever specific topic. And so they embody a way of being a scientist or being a philosopher. And so you pick up on characterological traits that maybe you resonate with. And the idea was, okay, well, is it possible to do that through technology? And my assumption was that it was not possible. I assumed it wasn't possible, but I thought, let's run the experiment. So I created a Twitter handle called ZaraSpake in order to start a nightly conversation class on philosophy. It's a part of a larger curriculum that I've written. It's sort of cherry picking pieces from different parts of that curriculum. Actually, I sort of catered it to the Twitter audience, but I knew where it was going to end up. Like, so we started with, well, we actually started with mythopoetic thinking. We went back 250,000 years to say, okay, look at these cave paintings and let's try to understand the way that mythopoetic thinkers were thinking about the world and understand sort of the milieu out of which philosophy emerged. But the course I wanted to do was a philosophy course. So we even went further back. We talked about embodied ideas and principles that you can see developing not in conscious propositional form in animals, but that are evident in their behavior patterns. And so we talked about that, but then we eventually got up to Thales. So we went through the image and the impression and the narrative and sculpture and painting and that sort of a thing after the animals. And then we went to this propositional game of philosophy and saw how it emerged out of the milieu that made it possible in the first place. So what I didn't want to do was start a philosophy course and make the mistake that most people, it seems to me that most men figure out something that they're good at, and then they often make the mistake of thinking it's the only thing worth being good at. And I think that happens to philosophers too. And so I wanted to have a philosophical class, but I wanted to have it and say, okay, this is the dialectic between mythopoetic and prophetic and religious imagery with philosophical thought. And then here's the conversation between philosophical and scientific thought, and sort of nestle those all together as best we could. But when we got into the course, I knew where it was going to end up. I knew it was mostly going to be ending up with Nietzsche. So I made the handle ZaraSpake, just because when we started with Thales, and then, I just basically took 6 thinkers that I called the consummate thinkers. And so it was the consummate thinkers course. And so we did Thales, we did Socrates through the first third of Plato's dialogues. And we actually read through all of those works. And then we did Descartes. So we're skipping a lot of the curriculum. We're just barely touching medieval philosophy, but we did Descartes and we read through the Meditations, and we did Kant. And then we eventually read through all of Zarathustra. And then there was one other thinker after that who's alive today and retweeted the class, which was pretty fun. We read 3 books, either written by or recommended by Scott Adams at the end. And it was kind of a fun way to cap it off. And in any case, so because I knew where it was going and I knew what we were talking about with, Socrates is talking about, on the day he died, he said, okay, well, here's the cup. I can't wait to drink it. And he's sitting with his friends. He says, look, let me tell you something. Here's why I've focused on ethics and only ethics. In fact, we've been doing philosophy. We've been having great conversations, and we've been hammering out our ideas and sophisticating them by challenging each other. And that's all real. But we've been doing something else that I haven't confessed. What we've been doing is trying to orient our souls properly with the source of all truth, goodness, beauty, and justice. We've been trying to get to know it. And he said, I want to know it in a relational kind of way, the way the mythopoetics would say Adam knew his wife, right? This was sort of the aim of the mythopoetics to understand the world was relationally. Okay, so I learned something about the world, which means I learned something about myself, or I learned something about myself and I learned something about the world. It's how do you relate to family and culture and nature and the divine in that sort of way, which is very different from propositional arguments where you say, okay, I'm going to refine this phrase. It's a phrase that has a truth value. It could be true, it could be false. And then when I assent to that statement, that's having truth. Well, Christ said, I am the truth. It's a weird thing to say, right? So it's anyway. So the point is with that mythopoetic understanding of saying, well, wait a minute. Socrates is talking about the same thing. He wants to relate to the source of beauty and goodness so that he knows it so well that he can find it in other things, right? And
Yeah,
Zarathustra, Nietzsche's Zarathustra, is very characterological. Nietzsche's problem of what the West is going to do with nihilism, his answer to the problem is not this proposition, it's this guy Zarathustra. And so by understanding how to read these consummate thinkers as sort of synthesizing mythopoetic ways of thinking with philosophical propositional ways of thinking, we can unlock the meaning of the text. So anyway, that was the point of the book, and I knew it was going to end up, and that's
yeah,
why I
yeah.
made that
So,
handle.
and also it's since Nietzsche is sort of making a callback to the mythopoetic with with by speaking through Zarathustra, you're also tying the whole, like you said, tying the whole course together, right? That's sort of the idea there. Um,
Yeah.
and,
So yeah. So yeah. Exactly.
and it is and you said it like you took us on a bit of a journey there. So there's lots of stuff that we can cover. Um, and I think like one of the ideas that I think that you're highlighting that I think is very important is this idea of the propositional of you call it the philosophy game, the propositional with the mythopoetic that both have to be considered. That it's one understanding, one way of knowing is incomplete without the other, right? I think you were getting at that, and then also understanding the relationship between the two. I would think there's actually there's more ways of knowing than that, but for
There
those,
are. There are.
yeah, but for the sake of this art discussion right now, we can say that with those two is understanding the relationship is very important as well. Another way I've heard that put is um the not the that sort of that philosophical understanding being the knowledge of Athens, and then or reason, and then there's the um that we should describe as the mythopoetic, I think, like comes into faith, and also the understanding of Jerusalem. So at Athens and Jerusalem have to keep each other in balance. I think that like that's
There's a dialectic. There's a conversation happening between them.
yeah.
It's yeah. So we can talk more about that. That's really interesting. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
we can't do the whole course all at once, but yes,
Yeah.
looking for the conversations
Let's
between different approaches is the way to go for sure.
but yeah, but let's talk about that, because actually like the doing the whole course all at once could be something else that we could play with. Um and I think that's part of the wrestling here, because there's two dynamism. There's like a concentric force and an eccentric force, right? Where we have to expand our ideas and our understanding, but we also have to like pull things back and make the right sacrifices as well, right? So we have to prune things back. We have to be like a gardener or a carpenter, right? So we're we're adding we add things, we sort of pull in ideas, we talk about things holistically, but we're also, and so we're expanding the frame, like getting back to finding the frame. We're expanding the frame, but we're also contracting the frame as we're trying to find it, right? We're trying to find the optimal frame for the moment. So that's the whole thing. Like we are in a sense talking about the whole course, but at the same time we're talking about we're trying to contain the conversation to the essence of what's important. And I wanted to sort of connect that, like I because I was peeking at a couple of your courses. I didn't actually watch any episodes all the way through, but there are lots of good ideas and lots of great things to touch on in there. And I watched a bit on the Rumi one and the mythopoetic one, and it struck me, you said something about um when you're discussing Rumi, you made the point that in 2 lines he can write a whole book, right? And then he does that 2 lines again and again and then again and again. And I think that that's one of the powers of what you described as the mythopoetic, um, is that it's done in thick concepts, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is that it, thick concepts are the only ways to express what I call fractal truth, right? This idea that it's not just true for me now. It's not just true for us, Zara and I having this conversation now, but it's going to be true for my day. It's going to be true for my life. It's going to be true for my son's life. It's going to be true for my community. It's going to be true for my country. It's going to be
How can
it's
it
that
how can
eternal.
how can a simple so this is a great question that I wrestled with for a while. How can a simple 10-line story be true on every level of analysis at the same time?
Well, it's because it has the right, it finds the right patterns, right? It finds the right, it there, and that's why I was talking about that idea of the fractal, right? Is that like a fractal, you see you going down into it, into different sort of levels of the frame, and to see the same pattern appearing again and then again and again. If you zoom back out and you go in another area of the fractal, you can go and you see the same pattern appearing again and again and again. And that's exactly what um that's the gold. That's what the mythopoetic's trying to bring forth, right? It's just trying to connect with where can I see the pattern of patterns, right? The the heuristic, it's a sort of a complicated word, but like the heuristic or the rule of thumb, the the understanding, the cliff note that is always true, right? That I can always use in any situation. Um, yeah, those are the things that we're looking for, and that's what the mythopoetic can express that can't be expressed it propositionally easily.
Right. So that's what they're after. And the ancient philosophers called it the arche, right? It's what's
Mhm.
this, right? So it's the root where we're getting archetypal, right? The
Oh,
Jungian
I
concept.
was looking for that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So the arche is the face of God, according to medieval philosophers, right? It's what the mythopoetics were aiming at. It's the source of all being. Here's the crazy thought. If you actually get an image of what that looks like, it's the source of all being. So why should it surprise you that it makes itself the impression of that thing is on every level of analysis? Because
Hmm.
all things, all being is expressed as that thing. And so when we looked at the consummate thinkers course, we said, okay, here's some propositional, argumentative, dialectic, analytical thinkers in philosophy who are also trying to get at the arche. Not every philosopher believes in the arche or is aimed at the arche, but these philosophers are trying to get there. But the only way to really get there, according to each one of them, including Descartes, including Socrates, including Nietzsche, is to say, we've got to get back to the pre-philosophical way of thinking, because they were actually able to make progress. You know, it's funny. For about 20 years of my life, every 18 months or so, I would get this impulse to say, I should know about the ancient Greek myths.
Hmm.
And so I would go online and I would try to look them up, and I'd read them for about half an hour, 45 minutes. And I would say, who the heck could build a society around such ridiculously random stories? They just did not make any sense
Hmm.
to me. And so I'd give up because I couldn't make any sense out of him. Apollo has a lyre, but he also rides a chariot. He has something to do with the sun and medicine. And it just seems like you're throwing random things in, and the stories just seemed random, and I didn't understand them. Um, but there are some keys to unlocking. So here's what I realized. I said, okay, wait a minute. These stories, the ancient Mesopotamian stories, these mythopoetic stories, they took rock wielding, poop throwing apes and turned them into cathedral builders and pyramid builders.
Yeah.
Okay, there's probably really profound truth in them. I just don't know how to listen properly. I don't know how to unlock them. And so about 7 years ago, I got this idea. Maybe there's a way of listening to the story properly, right? Having the ears to hear it. And so I looked for what those keys might be. I found I found them through a process. I found some of them through a process that I won't take the time to describe. When I went back to the Greek stories, I was overwhelmed. It was like a tsunami of meaning. And like you said, it said something simple about every level of analysis. But what it said is, if you really want to understand who you are and your place in the world, adopt a mythopoetic way of thinking. Say, I'm a character. I'm not I'm not an object. with matter, with energy. I'm a character, I'm a personality, and I'm navigating a world full of personalities.
Hmm.
Okay, so the
Yep.
mythopoetics are trying to understand the relationship to nature the way you and I would build a relationship, the way you and your wife have a relationship if you're married, right? It's like
Yeah.
you never get to the bottom of it. You never get to a point where you say, oh, I know everything about this person. They can't surprise me anymore. It's like, that's not what it's like. And the mythopoetics were understanding their place in the world and how to orient themselves properly to get to where they were trying to get to by saying, okay, Apollo's a dude. That's the simplest way to say it, is there's this personality out there that doesn't die when an individual dies.
Hmm.
Mars is out there, Venus is out there. These are personality types that sort of float above the rest of us, and if you're not aware of them, they can possess you and they can make you act in ways that aren't really what you're interested in, because they have their own historical interests. And so get to know them, make the right sacrifices and propitiations, and navigate a world inhabited by these personalities and relate to them properly. So go ahead.
Just on that though, because like a lot of good stuff there. Again, I want to connect it to uh uh the cognitive relationships as well, right? So when you're talking about and I'm afraid I might have lost it, but what so you're talking about the gods, you're talking about these understandings and these deeper patterns. Oh yes, so we have these cognitive resources in our minds, right? Are for dealing with the relationships of other people, right? Um, and I don't know how I don't know how much you know about computers, but computers will often have like a general processor, a CPU, but like a lot of um uh computers for people who are gamers and that, or data science enthusiasts will have what's called a GPU as well, like a graphical processing unit, which is basically another brain or another resource for the computer that is for that's really good at these other tasks, because it's a different way of it's still computation. The CPU could do it, but the GPU is specialized and it can do these tasks, these floating point processing tasks, much better and much more efficiently. And our brain has similar resources set like that. So we actually we have a relationship way of processing the world because we're intrinsically these social creatures. So of course, like if when we're trying to understand the world, thinking about it as agents, as like you were saying, as gods or personalities, or um there's a couple other words you can use for them, um out there, uh is helpful because we because it engages those resources of our mind. We can engage those if we're very good at dealing with people and understanding relationships. So understanding the world as relationships with people um, provides insights into this problem that we would under would be impossible for us otherwise, if that makes sense. Like that
Yeah, yeah, we're talking about different ways of thinking, and so there's a couple of questions. So the first one is, mythopoetic thinking is never going to build you an iPad or a ship that gets you to the moon.
yeah,
Okay, right? It's not the right way of thinking if you want
not
to
by
answer those
itself.
questions. No, you're right, not by itself. Scientific ways of thinking, where you objectify the world as your first premise and you just banish all consideration of anything subjective, that's the correct approach to get answers that are very powerful in that very limited domain of those types of questions.
Well,
Now,
yeah, it's actually like that. It's um two different kinds of problem solving, right? If you have a problem that you already have a fixed frame and you're looking for a specific discrete answer. So that's where the science really goes. If you can already have the problem framed, science is very effective because
that's right.
you're
That's exactly right.
you're focusing in on um uh the environment, and can refine knowledge. It's very easy for that. So finding that, not instead of looking for that, we were talking before about the um the hierarchical truth, or like sort of the fractal truth, right? That you can find with the mythopoetic. What you're finding, what you're looking for is a much more specific rule with this with science, right? You're looking for something that's much more that can be that can be domain specific, but then it can become an abstraction that can be applied in different places. But it's a very different sort of knowledge that you're looking for, and it's a very different method of looking there for that than the mythopoetic, because you're not looking for those things that are instantly generalizable. You're looking for those things that are abstractly and specifically true, if that makes sense. I don't.
It totally does. So I'm
Yeah,
looking, I've been looking for some graphics to pull up. Is there any way I can screen share here?
I think so. I think there's a screen
Screen
share.
share button. Okay. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh,
If
I think it's
it's
us by
possible.
default.
Okay.
Don't take it personally.
No, no, no. I'm just telling you what
uh
it says.
yeah.
So I want to talk about what you were saying there while you
I
look
was
for the
that.
way to
Yep.
enable the possibility of that. So there's a dialogue happening between philosophy and science. There's a dialogue happening between philosophy and mythopoetic ways of thinking. And there's a dialogue happening between mythopoetic ways of thinking and scientific ways of thinking. So what's chiefly important is for us to understand what questions what is the appropriate vocabulary and approach for specific types of questions, and what can the language of one of them do that the languages of the other ones can't do. So let me see. Oh, it still says, okay, good. So you're absolutely right. Science can work once it's been framed properly. One way of thinking about it is the philosophers go out into sort of the wilderness until they can clear away enough of the brush where we've got a clear enough set of concepts to deal with so Aristotle's talking about biology and he's inventing biology, right? The philosophers are inventing different scientific disciplines by getting our ideas about the terms that matter clear enough that then we can open up a billion questions amenable to empirical settling. And now you've got science, and then you just take the scientists, you say, okay, guys, go do all the nitty gritty work to answer the billion questions that are now made possible by the field that we've generated. But it goes further than that, because the scientists are not they have to sort of start with the axioms that of what those concepts mean that the philosophers give them. So they're using the concepts that the philosophers have sort of clarified and sharpened, but that means that they're never really I mean, some scientists are also philosophers, obviously, and
I think
there's
that actually
overlap.
is there's been a lot of that overlap, right? There's James Lindsay has
Sure.
this thing where he talks about the intellectual miasma that existed before the 1900s, right? Because a lot of um uh, like Newton was also an alchemist, and like Sir Francis Bacon was all the things, and that was more of it wasn't the exception, it was the rule, right? If you were um these domains weren't so clearly defined as we have them now as different disciplines, and there was a lot of spillover with different ideas. And I think that's actually one of the things, like talking about why um things have gone so wrong, is that um there we have some counterfeits going on. Because we now have this game of defining these different disciplines clearly. We have some people that are pretending to play one game but are actually playing a different game, and because of that, it's causing disruptions in the system. So specifically, I'm talking about, I think Rousseau presented changed liberalism significantly from he's actually playing a religious game, but he's pretending to play a of a philosophy a political philosophy game. So he introduced this. No, this liberalism was like this, but he started spilling in all of these theological concepts, or expanding it to something that becomes more of a cosmology. And uh and because it has these religious elements, it pulls these things in that then become disruptive to the system and aren't correctly or hierarchically ordered. So let's look at your,
Yeah, that's right. That's
yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah. So the answer to that is to understand what each of these vocabularies do and how they're nestled within each other and how they relate to each other, right? So that you're not using the wrong approach. I'll give a really simple, obvious example that nobody thinks about often, but that if you think about it, it really sharpens why this is important. So to do science, and science is extremely powerful. I have a science degree and I'm interested in science. I'm not slagging off science. I'm not saying we should bin science. I'm not saying science is nonsense. Science is powerful. And by the way, if you believe you know something that is about the empirical world, if you believe that you have the answer to a question that's amenable to empirical verification or falsification or adjudication is probably a better word for it, and you got it from the mythopoetic or you got it from philosophy, well, the scientists are the final arbiters of that. You have to take it to them and you have to try to hammer it out in their system to see if it's true or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to. The same thing is if you think you've extracted propositional truth out of art and poetry, let's say ethical truth, well, you don't get to say, I know that this is true now if I've got it in a proposition. You're trying to extract propositional truth from it. Maybe you've done it wrong. Maybe you've read a bad story. Maybe you haven't read the story properly or something. So once you have propositional knowledge, the philosophers are the final arbiters of that. You still have to hammer it out inside of an ethics class or an ethics conversation. So what we want to do is understand what are the realms proper for and what they're not. So in order to do science, you first have to objectify the world. We like to make fun of mythopoetics for anthropomorphizing everything.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't anthropomorphize everything because they didn't objectify in the first place. They just
Yes.
understood they just understood themselves as characters, and that's how they wanted
Yeah.
to relate to
Uh,
things.
I just on that, I actually have a big problem with the objective subjective divide that's become
Okay,
so
good.
prominent um since well since the end of medieval philosophy. And I think that it's actually a um in many ways it's become this deceptive shell game because objectification actually happens of after a lot of these a lot of the thinking happens. We don't actually start seeing the world into objects until after like a lot of these ideas are inserted. So to
We've known philosophically for thousands of years that modeling the world as little bits of hard stuff that have qualities is
yeah,
fictional.
yeah,
It's fictional. It's not accurate.
yeah, and
Now,
I just but just on that is and the danger of it though too, right, is this is that by sort of making that sort of your primary divide of objective and subjective, it allows uh, philosophers, but also to be confused and focus on this, and then nefarious actors can start playing a shell game where they start saying, well, subjective, objective, objective, subjective, subjective, objective, and then people get confused. They lose the track of where the ball is and that, and then they can tell them anything, or then then they
yeah,
can
that's exactly right.
yeah they can sell anything, and so it's been a huge waste of time because you have thousands of these philosophy papers that are just playing this ridiculous shell game, and then it's
That's
also
right.
uh, created all this opportunity for confused thinking, right? And it's yeah, so
It does. It
but
confuses thinking. And one of the ways, there's multiple ways that that shell game does that. One of the ways it does it is it has the pejorative connotations of subjective boiled down in people's minds to, oh, I feel like that's what it is, right? So things that like the what it feels like to be in the world means absolutely nothing, and because all it is just I feel like this. Well, the scientists will have the final answer, is what everybody thinks. The
yeah,
people thinking objectively will be right. Well, so let's look at how
yeah.
limited.
So and just maybe like what I think the actual divide is, and what your graph is sort of expressing here is more along the lines of um, between the abstract and the particular, right? So it's a sort of a graph of abstract and particular, or you could also say potentially um, it is theoretical and practical, right? So that's sort of your axis, and
No,
that's a, you don't think so? Okay, let's.
no. I get in this argument with other friends of mine, excuse me, because like you, they want to get rid of the word subjective and they want to get rid of that distinction. But I really think that distinction works well for me. One of the reasons why I say no is that there's very, very, very practical knowledge in the mythopoetic, right? So it's not that
Oh,
that's right,
but
right.
that's why it's a dialogue. Um, and that's why it's a conversation, and it's actually that then you're starting to get into the dynamism of perspective. So it's actually you can see in Catholic theology and a lot of early Christian thought, the innovation of Christianity was instead of seeing God as this individual, was also seeing God as three persons, that is one person. But those three persons are the Father and the Son having a conversation, right? And you can see that as as the abstract and the particular having this conversation, and and the going back and forth, the relationship between them being the man what manifests the Holy Spirit, right? Which is the third person of the Trinity, which is what binds them together. But it's those two it's those two perspectives having each way. So it's so depending where you are, right? Um, in that relationship, where it's not that the truth is singular, unified, and eternal, but it's us who are moving around. And it's so sometimes when you're looking for, depending on where you're at and what you're dealing with, sometimes when you're looking at it, it's going to be you're, like as you say, the mythopoetic is extremely practical. And but other times when you're looking at it, well, it seems more like depending on the application, it seems what we're doing in science is more practical, right? Because we're talking about a specific law or rule. And then you're talking about, well, it seems like the abstract has these like there's the laws of physics, like there's these we're describing the abstract, but we're also sort of describing the particular in this situation. So you get into its relationship, and it's
Okay, so that's not the distinction then, because that line runs down the middle of all of these.
um I think that part of the problem is that we we move, and why the dialogue is necessary is because we're always having to constant calibrate, recalibrate our location, refigure out where we are in the story, in the movement. And
Right.
because and
That's right.
yeah, and if you think about it from like I sort of I have a sort of multi-dimensional sort of like idea of it's in three dimensions is the best you can do it. But this intuition I have is like it's like no, it depends. Like if you're over here, it this the where in a sense like we're what's being moved around in the conversation. Like we're sort of like being trying to stay connected to the conversation. And depending where we are, the perspectives the perspectives are different, right? So what seems like is so since it's a back and forth, our location is what makes these things look like they're changing. But it's not that they're changing, it's that we're changing, and our position our position in space and time is changing, not the truth. That makes sense.
So let's walk through this because I think we're
Yeah.
going to come full circle back to what you're talking about. So if so you can't understanding limitations is important. Have noticed that I've drawn these as concentric circles, so nestled
Hmm.
within philosophy science. So it's more limited.
Yeah.
Well, the rules of chess limit what you can do when you're playing chess.
Hmm.
But if it's not for the rules of chess, you can't have brilliant and amazing and beautiful chess games. Okay.
Hmm.
So the limitations are what make possible the really powerful and beautiful accomplishments inside the field. Right.
Yeah.
So one of the rules for science is you're not allowed to consider anything that you can't force your peers to recognize through measurement. You could think of that as basically, you could sum up science as the rules of right thinking with an added restriction of only considering as relevant things that have empirical consequence. Fine. Let's take that as a working definition for now and say, well, what does that stop science from considering? Well, when I look at you, I see that you have a red shirt on. Well, at least it looks red through the camera. It might be
Hmm.
orange for all I know. But it's like something to see that red shirt. To see redness is there's a quality to that experience. When I feel pain, I don't get a robot message to my brain that says something negative to your future potential to reproduce is happening around your left arm and it should be pulled back right now. I feel the quality of what pain feels like. Well, science does not and never will have one sentence of information to tell us why it's like something to be in the world. But it is
Hmm.
like something. So you can look through microscopes and graphs at wavelengths all day long. You'll never find the orange quality or the redness quality or the greenness quality to seeing color. That's something that is subjective, which just means that science has nothing it can say about it. Now, what's silly to do is to say my science is to be a scientismist. A scientismist would have only one circle. They would have black falseness outside and science inside. But what they would do is they would say, well, I've decided not to consider subjective questions, which is what you're supposed to do if you're a scientist. That's
Hmm.
what makes science powerful. But once I'm done with that, I look around and I say, oh my goodness, I find no evidence. I see no evidence of subjective anything. So I deny free will. I deny consciousness. I deny the quality of what it's like to be in the world. Well, there are
Oh,
scientists who do that. They're called behavioralists. They're very brilliant, by the way, and they're worth studying. And we study them in our philosophy
yeah.
courses. But one of the famous ones is B.F. Skinner. Fantastic guy, definitely should be read. But there's a joke, and I bring up B.F. Skinner because it's a joke about B.F. Skinner. And what it says is B.F. Skinner is denying. So the behavioralists deny anything that isn't measurable because that's the only thing that's appropriate to talk about in science. But because they're scientismists, they actually deny that there is such a thing outside of that. The only meaningful conversation is the scientific one. So if you ask them, well, what is it like to be in pain? What they say is, well, here's what it's like to be in pain. When you're in pain, you grab your toe and you jump up and down and you go, ow, 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 ow. That's what it means to be in pain. We look at your behaviors. That's why they're called behavioralists. We look at your behaviors and we call that the definition of pain. And maybe we'll do a CAT scan or something on your brain. And if your brain is doing some behaviors, we'll say those are attenuated behaviors that have to do with being in a state of pain. But only if things are measurable will we consider them. Now, I just jumped up and down and my dog is running wild now. He
Hmm.
thinks we're playing or something.
Hmm.
So here's the interesting thing. So the joke is this: B.F. Skinner's lying in bed with his wife and he turns to her and he says, "That was good for you. Was it good for me?" Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
yeah, because yeah, I get it. Yeah, because it's observing the behavior.
Right.
Um,
So they're denying that you no, but
yeah.
we have overwhelming, immediately available evidence that it
Hmm.
is like something to feel pain, to feel
Yeah,
love, to see red. That it's not that there's any reason in science to deny those things. It's just that if you limit yourself to saying the only meaningful conversation is the scientific
yeah,
one, then you'll get to that silly and absurd and obviously ridiculous conclusion.
yeah.
Um,
And
Go
this
ahead.
just on that with defining the problem here too. I think like you were saying, chess is a good example, but also I think poetry is can in a different sense is a good example of this, right? Because if you add rules to poetry, um,
Mhm.
then it actually it contains the creativity, and you have much more amazing results, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and
Let,
yeah,
so that brings up a bigger issue, which is okay. Imagine you're a Judeo-Christian Yahweh kind of God. You're
okay.
completely powerful and unlimited, and you have all the cheat codes to being. You're lacking something. Isn't that a little boring? What is it that you're interested in? What are you chasing? You're chasing limitation. You're aimed at in love. You're chasing the thing that's the opposite of you. You're aimed in love at the finite. If you're the infinite, you're aimed at the finite.
Hmm.
And the finite, the bubbling brew of potentiality, whatever we consider the other side of the yin yang symbol, is chasing being. It's popping things into existence and trying to maintain them. And 99.999% of everything it tries immediately goes out of existence again. But it's chasing consistent, continual, eternal being. And so what the you were bringing up the Trinity before, and
Yeah.
you really would have loved this class that I threw in when we were doing the Twitter stuff. It blew my mind that the medieval Christians, it shouldn't blow my mind now that I've come to respect
Mhm.
mythopoetic thinking better. It doesn't, but it blew my mind that medieval philosophers understood that there was a trinity at the base of all being.
Oh
And
yeah.
there absolutely 100% is a trinity at the base of all being. And all of the mythopoetic stories are trying to give you an image through painting and sculpture and narrative of what this arche is like. And what they always seem to emerge at is the dance between incompatibles, a yin yang symbol. Well,
Well, so just on that, there's something else that they knew that we forgot is like you look at uh Thomistic thinking like Thomas Aquinas, and it's very clear that faith and reason are are complementary paths to knowing, right? Right. That's
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to actual to like and so that's bringing together that idea of reason being reason of Athens and faith of Jerusalem, the the um both being paths to God, both being paths to the logos, and being and having that sort of dialogical relationship of informing each other,
Right.
right, and keeping each other sane. Um,
Right. So the purpose of me saying what are the limits of
Trilogies,
science is not to throw science away. It's to say with all of these, let's understand when we're in the right realm for the
yeah,
questions that we're
yeah,
considering.
I agree, and that's and that thing of right realm. So actually, like I'll come at you with another sort of explanation of that, and why like your spears are sort of concentric, is you're going from the well-defined problems. Science handles the well-defined problems, and I understand why you don't like you don't throw religion in there, right? With the mythology and art, like you don't use the word religion at all. I don't know if that's choice, but the what you're calling that like the mythopoetic is ideally suited for undefined problems, and a lot of what we deal with in life is undefined problems, right? Undefined projects and undefined problems. Like we don't know exactly what we're looking for at the time, but it's life, it's time. We're still moving through time and space. I got to do it. I gotta figure it
That's
out. I
right.
have to find the frame to handle with this. So I have to actually regulate that. So really, you can look at the myth.
That's a part of life. That's a part of going through life, right? It's the
Yeah.
simple story of saying, okay, look, let me go to the scientists and the philosophers and figure out if I should marry this person.
Hmm. Yeah.
You're not going to get an answer. You're
Yeah.
not going to get an answer. So what you could do is you could sit there and never get married and die of old age, or
Hmm.
you could live. But to live means you have to actually act as though you know the answer, or rely on something that isn't a conclusive sort of solid answer, and move forward in faith. Right?
Yeah.
You just have to. Life forces you to do that. So
Yeah. No, and yeah, and exactly why I think like there's the three theological virtues, right? We were talking about love, but they're love, hope, and faith, right? And hoping and they those there's a relationship of I think love is the third member of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. It's the charity that keeps the whole thing in check, like keeps the thing working together, right? What stops the father and son from we could talk about the conversation, but also a game of catch, right? Like it's a game of catch is only interesting if a father and son are throwing the ball to each other in a place where they could possibly get it, right?
yep.
And they throw it back. So what keeps the game of catch together, right? Because it's very easy to bean the other guy with the ball, or like throw it off in another direction, or just refuse to throw the ball, or like be really close, so you're just passing the ball back and
Yeah.
forth. So it's a boring game. Like it's the spirit of caritas. It's the spirit of charitable love, of fatherly love, where you're challenging each other in the game, and you're moving it back and forth, and it's the love and the understanding of the other person and paying attention to the other person that keeps the game coherent. And I think there's just that same sort of balance between faith and hope, right? Is like you can sit there theorizing and saying, well, all the possibilities, trying to figure out the potential of like whether I should marry this person or not. But at some point, you got to throw the ball to hope, right? And hope has to throw the ball to faith, and
You have to
faith has,
step out. You have to
yeah,
start walking the tightrope. You're not going to get to the other side of the tightrope unless you're actually walking across it. So
and that's
whatever word people want to put on that, you can call it faith, you can
well,
call it whatever,
I
but
think
it's
that's
all of those.
I think that faith needs to be reclaimed and has to actually be brought up to that, and that like that's another that problem that's come out. I think, and you know, it sort of connects to what you're saying about the behaviorists. Um, like they've created this sort of twisted form of faith and sort of thrown faith off to the side and saying, well, that's believing in things you don't have. Faith is just believing in things you don't have evidence for. No,
Right?
faith
That's a
is
bad
actually
definition.
acting in the world. Faith is going out on that, as you said, the tightrope. Like nothing is accomplished without faith, because faith is that reductive processes. I know I have all these hope. There's all these possibilities, but this I'm choosing this, and I'm going to actualize it. This is the person I'm going to marry. This is the thing I'm going to study today. This is the God I'm going to believe in, and I'm going right. That's what faith is about.
You can't live without it. I mean, you
Yeah.
could just sit there crippled and play your video games and smoke your pot and die of old age, or you can live, but you can't live without that courage. And so those types of answers are characterological. And when I say they're characterological, I mean they're ways of being in the world. So the proper vocabulary for talking
Mm-hmm.
about those sorts of things is narrative. If you were to read King Lear, or let's say you're reading Hamlet with a reading group, and somebody in the reading group says, hey, wait a minute. The Elsinorian dynasty probably did not have a prince at that time who uttered the phrase to be or not to be. And they think they're talking about the book and the story that you're there to read.
Yeah.
They're missing the point, right?
Yes.
They're missing the point. It's like the amount of wisdom that you can get out of King Lear or Oedipus, it's bottomless. You read the story as a character and relating to the characters and seeing how the characters are relating. The story is saying, hey, here's a guy. Here's what he's like in this setting. Here's what he's like when he interacts with this person. It's the proper vocabulary for that is narrative.
Yeah.
And so it's mythopoetic.
So that's actually that's a good point. Is on that is like, so people ask me about my faith, and since I mean I was at one point a new atheist, so I've made a long road, but I now I'm a Catholic. I don't know if devout sounds like a word. I feel I'd have humility if I if I say I'm devout or not. But if I'm as some people like to say, or like if they're evangelizing, they're going to say, oh, well, you know, like the shadow turn, like it exists, so therefore, you know, Christ exists and we have that. But honestly, I don't like the shadow turn isn't important in that way. I wouldn't present that as proof of Christ's of my relationship with Jesus Christ, because it's if it was if it was I have to be honest, like if it was ever proved to be a fake, or or something along that wouldn't affect my faith, right? It
Right,
has
right.
nothing to do with
Why?
it.
Why?
Why? Because
Exactly, because it has nothing to do with it. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, well, it it's supporting evidence, but it's not it. But what it really is the reason I believe in the stories is that because there's the fractal truth. Christ is with me in every moment. I feel the love of the Holy Spirit. I see the power of the Bible stories today, tomorrow, like through the week, through the year, through my life, in my true of me, true of my family, true of my community, up through all these spheres. So it's not like you can just sort of say, "Aha, I got you." Like there was
It's
no
not that
Jesus
kind
crisis
of
on the census,
it's
right?
so let's look at two groups of people.
Jesus
The
national. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, you're fine. Fundamentalist Christians who believe in a young earth, and Richard Dawkinite fans who think that they think scientifically all the time, even though basically
Mm,
nobody knows how to think scientifically
you
except
can't.
really, really smart scientists. About 20% of the time they're in the lab. But most scientists don't know how to think scientifically alone, let alone these people. But in any case, let's look at both of them and how they approach the Bible. The fundamentalist opens up Genesis and he says, the literal truth is the ultimate truth. It's the most true something can be. So I'm going to read this story and I'm going to realize what the literal truth is. And this is the literal truth because it's the Bible and I believe the Bible. And so this is how old the earth is and everything like that. The Richard Dawkinite person says that I like Richard Dawkins. I'm not trying to insult the guy. He's an
Yeah.
excellent teacher and all this other stuff, but I'm
Yeah.
not trying to slag him off. But the
Well,
Richard
he
Dawkinite
needs to be
fan,
criticized
well,
and certain
that's
things.
fine.
Yeah.
He can
But
be
yeah.
criticized, but I'm not
Yeah.
trying to. All right, but in any case, the
Sorry, go
the
on.
the fan of his, I feel bad, but the annoying fans of his,
Hmm.
the large majority of the, let's call it the
I was one of
popular
them. So yeah.
audience. That you're right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, me too. So
Yeah.
what they do is they look at Genesis and they say this is not the literal truth, but the literal truth is the ultimate truth. It's the way we want something to be true. So therefore, the Bible is wrong. But they both agree on an awful lot. What I want to do is I say to the fundamentalists, I say, of course, it's literally true. Look how much more profoundly true it is than that. If it's
Hmm.
true in all these other ways, of course it's literally true. And what I say to the Richard Dawkinite fans is, of course it's not literally true. Look at how profoundly true it is in all these other more important and deeper ways. Who cares if it's literally true, right? And,
Yeah.
and that's what you're saying. You're saying that's missing the point of the story. Is
Mm.
it's like to say, well, Hamlet didn't happen exactly that way or at all, or there
Yeah.
was no such character. It's
Well, I mean,
you're
even
missing it.
even if I'm telling you the most important defining stories from my life, if I try and get lost in the weeds and try and get them particularly right in all the ways,
You don't even know those things.
yeah, you're even but if I did it, those details have been lost to me for a reason because the underlying pattern is the true defining thing, right? And
That's
that's
right.
what my brain's looking for, and that's what it's trying to remember is it's
You were evolved to
yeah,
look for that. Now
yeah.
that's what's really interesting. Okay, so here's a wild idea. Let's embrace science so radically because I'm hearing in my head all of the philosophical objections and the scientific objections to this. Let's deal with the scientific ones. Imagine you're a scientist and you believe in scientism and that sort of thing. You say, okay, I want to embrace science. Well, I'm going to embrace science. I'm going to embrace science so much that I'm going to say Darwin is by definition true. Darwin is so true that whatever I
Mhm.
am the product of the cosmos as a whole, selecting away anything that doesn't fit in well with it.
Yeah.
That process produced a personality.
Hmm.
Why is it so strange that the mythopoetics thousands of years ago are saying, I want to understand the cosmos. I think it's personal.
Yeah.
How else how else did we emerge personalities? How did the
Yeah.
cosmos make things that fit in well with it, which are designed, like you say, to pay attention to the narrative if being isn't more like being in a story than it is like being matter or
Yeah.
bits of hard stuff, which we already know is fictional.
Yeah.
So
And to
anyway,
go
that's
yeah, it's to go back to your graph here. So um the ill-defined problems are the ones that need to be solved first, right? Because before you can even have any defined problems, you need to resolve the ill-defined problems. And that's why like the the
it
mythopoetic is
has
so
to come
important.
first.
And this is also why like they say God is love, right? Because the first thing you have to do before you have a frame, a well-defined frame is you have to find the frame.
So
And
that's that love point is why it doesn't just have to come first, it always has to be gone back to,
yeah,
because we said earlier
yes.
science is going to get you to the moon, but it's not going to make you dream about going to the moon. It's
Hmm.
not going to orient you towards that in the first place. It's not. You could take all of the scientific accomplishments since Descartes, every scientist working, and say for the last 500 years we're going to rewrite history so that all of them are doing is studying one blade of grass.
And I think that's actually like
They
why.
could keep publishing. They could keep publishing. There's still more to learn
Okay.
about one blade of grass. Why are we not focused that
Yeah.
direction? We get
What?
our
Yeah.
direction from something else. Go ahead.
So actually, what you just said, I think, is very important about why I'm saying how it has to start with love, and you immediately point out it and has to end with love, and that is why God says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega," right? Because I'm where you come from, but also I'm where
That's
you're
right.
going, right? I have to be your aim as well. If you're going to the moon, to get to the moon, you know, I have to
Right.
be there. right?
That's
You have to
why
be what you're focusing on. Yeah.
that's why I wrote these as concentric circles instead of equal circles that are just communicating with each other. You get your meaning from the thing that's the most basic and profound, that mythopoetic. You clarify your conscious thoughts, you clarify your propositions in philosophy, and you play a more limited game, but it's a more powerful game because of the limitation.
Yeah.
And then you limit it further. But the reason why it's concentric is that the thing the foundation upon which you can have these tall pillars that you can't really build in the mythopoetic. You have to do science to do certain things, like we pointed out. But the thing that gives the basis for all of that, like you said, it's the alpha and the omega. It's the deepest level of reality, which means you can't get beneath it and you can't pry it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what and to get it here too, like so we and even that scientist in the room, he's still having to solve like he may be denying his faith. He may be like the Skinner who's like who's saying, oh, it doesn't exist, like to really sort of focus himself down on the science, but he's he's still at the day he's still a mythopoetic ape who's
Oh,
playing a
oh yeah.
science game, right?
It's a
And
beautiful performance he puts on amongst his peers. It's really impressive, and it's really worth studying what they can accomplish by doing that. But it's look, like I said, an actual 99% of the people who have scientist in their name tag don't know how to think scientifically at all.
yes, that's
The
actually been revealed to us quite apparently over the last 3 years.
that's why we have the methods, and the whole
Yeah,
system is the peer review is necessary. 50% of articles are shown to be
yeah,
unreplicable within 1 year.
yeah.
So what does that mean about 500 years? I mean, so in any
There's
case, a
there's
few people. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that there is some problems with peer review. Peer review
Yeah.
was
Oh,
introduced in the
yeah.
1960s. So I but having that process of dialogue and presenting your ideas to your peers to be challenged is absolutely
It's
necessary.
necessary.
But doing that
It's
behind
not
closed
sufficient.
doors before it can even be
Oh, yeah.
published, that's a problem. And that's something
Oh,
that what has become this process of peer review, it's become a
it's not perfect.
stultified, it's become a magisterium. It's become a bad
Of
magisterium,
course it
a
has. Yeah.
tyrannical
No,
magisterium. Yeah.
and this is dangerous. So we call it eminence based science. Okay.
Mhm.
Right, instead of evidence based. All right,
The
and this
eminence,
is
yeah.
this is this is seriously a problem, because one of the ways of thinking about true science, and so I've been slagging off science a little bit. The reason is that I value it a lot.
Hmm.
If you really value science, what you might say is something like, this is a set of really strict rules to try to drag poop throwing apes kicking it, screaming against their will towards some form of objectivity, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not like, oh, well, I have a lab coat, so now the things I say are true. That's like when you watch a Nova special and the guy with the lab
Yeah.
coat is talking about, by definition, non-scientific things like other universes. Well, if it's another universe, you can never have evidence of it, so it's not scientific at all. But
Okay.
anyway, so you
Are
get the idea.
are you familiar with Saint John Henry Newman at all?
No,
He's
I
a
don't
so
even
he's
know the name.
John Henry Newman. I'll send you a link after. He is an English saint, um but he was a polymath, and he wrote a book called The Idea of a University in the late 1800s, early 1900s, somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
I've heard of that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it actually and he's basically claims it's like you need, in order for a university to exist, he's emphasizing like universities ought to exist, and they have to, you have to have all these challenging ideas, but within it you have to have an overarching theology that keeps the whole
Well,
thing together.
that's in the university too.
Yeah, yeah, but hold on. So, but he
Yeah,
actually
go
sort of
ahead.
predicts what's happened in a lot of ways. I mean, like you need, and it's exactly because you need a way to deal with, like you have your concentric circles. You need a way to deal with the big circle, right? You need to have the ill-defined problem, uh, uh, a way to an agreed upon way within the universities to deal with the ill-defined problems, and that's what the theology provides, because you and so that within the theology, those individual disciplines can play their philosophy and science games. So they can, so they can actually play solve their well-defined problems. They can
Well,
they can stay focused in that, and they don't have, and they can do so within that framework, or that mythological field, that mytho the theo I'll just say theological
sure.
field.
Theological. You can say that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It includes,
theological.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, and what happens if you take away the theological bounds on the university, like pretend it doesn't exist? What you end up with is all these individual fields trying to cover over and deal with the undefined problems, and do so badly, right? So then you'll have political science and psychology, and maybe even a little physics in there, try and cover over and cover for God, because they're missing they're missing that overarching theology. And I think that's what you're seeing in universities, and that's actually why you see this this over within universities, this drive towards more and more administration, because you have these administrators are
Dear
trying
Lord.
to they're trying to build a synthetic God, right? Because they're denying the existence of it. They're not dealing with um the mythopoetic, or the undefined problems in the right
Look,
way. Instead, they're just trying to make layers and layers of administration to cover it up.
look, if you want to get me angry, we can start talking about what's wrong with the universities right now, because there's a
Yeah.
lot wrong with them.
Well, actually, let's go back to full
Okay.
circles, because we were, I think that was the overarching thing that we were trying to get to at this story. And I think we've done this conversation. I think we've done it rather effectively. I just want to maybe talk a little bit about like because we've been dancing around it, but we haven't. But maybe to wrap it up, we can hit it home to like, okay, so what's uh, why are you trying to save the humanities, and what's
Okay,
worth
so
saving with
let
the
me talk about
humanities?
what it is I'm trying to do and what it is I'm doing, because I wouldn't call it saving the humanities necessarily, but
Reclaiming?
maybe that works. So here's what I'm doing in my conception of it.
Okay. Keep it
Remember
to sort of
this.
5 minute wrap up, because we're sort of,
Fine.
yeah.
Well, I'll do my best. So uh, rapidly, then there's a scene in Pinocchio where they're tearing up the books and smashing the statues.
Yes.
We won't talk about all the details. That's what's happening.
Pleasure
It's
Island.
turning around. We're going to change it. Pleasure Island. You sell the kids to the salt mines after they have protracted adolescence, and they can
Hmm.
smoke pot for 4 years of a 13th grade or something, and the piece of paper has to go to everybody, so now it has to be worth less to be able to do that. All of this stuff that's happening. Okay, so what do we do in that setting? Well, first of all, the government decided that everybody needed a degree, and the only way you can give everybody a degree is to make it worth less, and you can pump a lot of money and get a top heavy administration and tell professors what words they should use, and tell students that you're going to have a Kafkaesque trial about what conversations they're having with each other on campus, and all this other anti-academic nonsense. Okay, if that's what's happening, what can we expect? Well, first of all, it's like the housing bubble. It's going to burst, but it's not going to be destroyed. It's going to go back down to the 10% of what it was when it was valuable to begin with, and what it should have been from the start anyway. So here's an image of what I think I'm doing. In Fahrenheit 451, people think of that as a dystopic novel. It's not. It's a utopic novel. It's a utopia. And what it is the government's going around burning all the books and stopping people from reading the books. It's like, it's not enough that we're pretending to care about them and throwing them away. You're not allowed to read them anymore. Fine. Well, what was the final chapter? The final chapter was a group of intellectuals who said, I'm going to go live in the woods, and we're going to travel, and at night we're going to make a campfire, and then each of us has memorized a different book. I've memorized Plato, you've memorized Orwell, we've got different things memorized, and we're going to recite them to each other. That's the utopia. Now, there's plenty of, it's not the solution to the problem. It's my solution to the problem. So Jordan Peterson's been talking about for years having an online university and trying to fix the problem by wrestling accreditation away. And I've got a different solution for the accreditation problem in my system, which I won't talk about right now. But the idea is, look, this is ours. It's our heritage. It's the thing that made civilization possible. And if the corruption of our culture has gotten to the point where we're corrupt against the core thing that made us possible in the first place, we can expect collapse to come. If the collapse doesn't come and we turn the ship around, or if it does come, either way, the solution is to go back to the great works and go back to the humanities and read them for our own sake, and value them like we're traveling through the woods and we're saying this is what makes life worth living. So cancel your Netflix account and join me every evening. We're reading great books and we're going to discuss them, and we're putting a whole curriculum of classes together. And I won't talk more about the details of the classes, but we're starting in August academic philosophy course. We just finished a great works approach, which is very different. We're kind of ninja crawling between those two different approaches. I've got much more of the curriculum already written, and there's plenty more we'll be doing, but we're doing a mythology course, reading Ovid's Metamorphoses. We're doing a mysticism course where we started reading Rumi's poetry. I'm working with another professor we're putting together a class on liberty, natural law, and ways of interpreting the Constitution, which is really fantastic. So sort of liberty in the history of the US. There's a whole bunch of content that's going to be put together at some point, and we're just recording it and putting it together. And anyway, the point is, why would I order Domino's and watch Netflix at night when I could be reading the great works that turn poop throwing apes into civilization builders? If we're going to rescue civilization, or if it's going to collapse, the answers are going to be found there. And so that's what we're going to do for the rest of our lives, is spend our time focusing on that. I don't think it's the solution, but it's my solution, and nobody can take it away from me until they develop the AI that destroys all the digital copies of the books or something.
Yeah, or rewrites them with their
rewrites them in a way where you can't figure out what they are.
Makes the new Netflix remakes of all of them.
well, this is worrying.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah,
physical copies of this. I'm building a library at this location. I've moved into the woods to start a homesteading project while doing this online, and I'm building a library of physical
absolutely.
copies of these things at the same time.
I think
that
that's very
is
admirable.
worrying.
So actually, I think this has been a great conversation, Zara. And there's two things I'd like to say to end it. And and the first, I think, is hopeful and sort of may resonate with you on this. And it's residuum revertitur, which is means from the remnant will return.
What's
That there's
left, we go back. Yeah, okay.
yeah, stuff will go back, and it's this idea that when the church has fallen into the church has fallen into paganism times, it's the laity, the faithful laity who works like an ember to rekindle the fire.
Well, and it has to happen with each individual person too. That's the Phoenix story. I mean, why
Yeah.
do you burn away everything and rebuild from the ashes? Because the ashes are what don't burn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're building with a bunch of stuff that can burn, well, it might burn. But if you're building out of the stuff that can't burn, now you've found the thing to actually build off of. You found the stuff that won't burn, and you're going to build off of that. Well, good. Burn everything else away and build off of that.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
And the last thing is Viva Cristo Rey.
Leave a what?
Viva Cristo Rey, which means,
Life.
it's Spanish. It's not Latin. It's Spanish, and it's Christ is King.
Okay.
Christ is
Okay.
King.
Well,
Yeah, which is
yeah.
which is key to, like, you're not God, I'm not God. Christ is the only one with the authority.
I have no
Yeah.
impulse to deny that phrase. There's no argument against that here. Boy, we touched on so many things. I feel like we should do a part 2 at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
It's been really pleasant talking with you. This has been really wonderful, and there's lots more we can talk about. Thank you for having me here, and for having a great conversation. And people watching don't know that this is really our first conversation. This is a first time meeting. It's been a pleasure to meet you. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you take care, Zara. Have a great time. Have a great day.
Brother. Thank you so much.